Welcome to Navigating Single Fatherhood, the podcast dedicated to empowering single fathers on their unique journeys. Because of my single fatherhood journey, I understand the challenges and the triumphs that come with this incredible experience. Each week, I'll share valuable insights, practical advice, and actionable strategies to help you navigate single fatherhood. Join me as I chat with a variety of experts in areas such as parenting, mental health, wellness, and even personal finance. Here's some inspiring stories from fellow single dads who are doing some amazing things. You can be one of them. Plus, I offer my personal experiences to support you in overcoming obstacles and celebrating those victories. Together, we'll build a community of strong, resilient fathers to embrace the journey of single fatherhood. Are you ready to come along? Subscribe to the JL3 Motivation Channel, like each episode, and share this important information with every single father you know. Because the more tools we have access to, the more equipped we become for our journey. Be sure to tap the bell to be among the first to get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. Single fathers, you don't have to do this alone. I want to have a conversation about the challenges that African American men go through when dealing with the single parenting widowhood experience. Although single parent widowhood is difficult for every man, for the African American, there are additional challenges that come along with the circumstance. This is not a session to say that we have it so much harder than everyone else. This is an opportunity to further dissect a subset of a subset so that we can better understand and diagnose and offer assistance to a group of people that are very marginalized. Dr. Young, please, first off, thank you so much for giving me a few minutes of your time.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for creating this platform to discuss such an important topic.
Further elaborate on what you do.
So, I'm a psychotherapist. I'm a private practitioner here in the state of PA, and I've served communities since 2014. So, I actually served in New York and migrated here to PA, and I've been serving all walks of individuals from children as young as 3 to adults as old as like 85. So I serve many people in this community and a wide range of mental health conditions. It includes depression, anxiety, stress management, definitely parenting issues that come up. So this topic is near and dear to my heart. And I don't think it's discussed enough in my experience. It really needs more attention and more data is needed so that we can better support Black single fathers who are widowers.
Absolutely agree. Whenever you've worked with a single father who's become a widower, what are some of the things that you recommend or that you do to help them to understand how to navigate their journeys?
Well, I first like to explore what their understanding is of their experience, right? So you have a multifaceted situation here. You have the loss of a loved one, a partner. You have being faced with parenting as a single father. You have the fact that this individual might have their own emotional process to deal with, but now they have to be that support person for their children's emotional process. So it's very multifaceted, very nuanced. And I like to help them explore, first of all, to have them say to me, what is my lived experience here so that I can kind of come alongside them. I can't tell them what their experience is going to be. They have to really share that with me and understand it so that I can now stand in a stance of support for them. So, a lot of emotional awareness, a lot of self concept work, just having them understand, well, here's where I think I am, here's what I'm learning about myself, and here's what I can do in terms of coping. And really helping them to see that it's not just about coping, but it's about arriving at healing. I know a lot of what we talk about in therapy, coping skills, but we want to really not just cope, we want to arrive at healing.
Coping skills are a major aspect, but you're right. The healing is the key. Resilience helps in the healing process. You're now teaching a person how to stand up on their own after a challenge. How do you help them to build that resilience?
Mhm. Yeah. So looking at first their inner power to arrive at healing. Sometimes an individual might come and not feel very powerful, not feel very capable to arrive at that healing. So I help them really look at, well, what are the strengths that you have still, even though you have had this experience that felt devastating, that's still not the totality of who you are, right? And so I try to help them to see that there is transformation in that pain that can happen, right? There can be turning pain into some powerful dynamics. It doesn't have to be where you're in that state of pain and now you're not functional. So I try to get them to kind of buy into that kind of insight, that you are deserving and worthy of full healing, and here are some avenues to get there. I help them to look at, well, who is in your support system right now? Because you can't do this alone. I would be a support person, yes, but do you have anybody else that you consider to be a support person to come alongside you through this journey? And it is a journey. I'm going to use that word very deliberately. Healing is a journey, it's really a process.
Every step that you take is leading you to either a forward progress or a backward step. The challenge for a lot of men, and especially African American brothers, is that when we go forward, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that we're choosing to forget the person that we lost.
Mm,
How do you help them to understand that you're not forgetting the person? What you're doing by helping yourself is honoring the life that that person had and the life that you had with them. How do you help them to see the difference between the two? As I said before, society may not agree with the decision of that single father. So, how do you help them to understand that it's not about society?
mhm.
It's about the way you're choosing to see the circumstance.
Right. And really broadening that perspective even within that experience is so key, because it's tantamount to like your healing, and you want that healing to definitely be the healthy systematic process, right? So getting them to first open up. Men are not usually very expressive, and even so for black men or men of color, the emotional expression, the emotional availability is not always there. And so I encourage that expression, verbal processing, emotional processing of what they're feeling. So when you can express it and acknowledge, yes, I'm grieving, and here are some other feelings I'm having, and I'm worried about me being a parent. You all these things can happen at the same time, and we can absolutely process them at the same time. And in speaking of, your loved one, you are honoring their memories. You are honoring who they were to you, who they represented in this life. And it's okay to show that vulnerability in speaking of them, and sharing how you feel about the loss and how the loss has impacted you and how you feel it would impact your parenting. It's absolutely, I think, vital and key to really dig deep and have them access those parts of their emotions that they don't usually access. That's one of the first steps in healing, confronting everything that they're feeling, confronting, working through, overcoming. That's kind of like the process that I look at. Confronting what you're feeling and experiencing, acknowledging it, owning it, naming it.
The process that you help them work through, it creates a feeling of change sometimes in a person's circumstance, especially when it comes to black folks. We're not so good with change, and it's interesting. We've heard the old saying, I'm this way, I'm never going to change, and this. What we don't understand is that change has happened. Whether you decide to buy into the change or not is irrelevant. What you have to do is look at the situation around you. You not moving is not going to change things. That person's not coming back.
Mm.
How you navigate a way to continue forward?
Right. One of the first things I like to address is having the person describe how they're functioning. Because if they're not realizing that functioning is not optimal and that it's hurting, their general well-being, then they won't necessarily look at why that change needs to happen. So I said, let's look at your functioning. Let's look at your functioning as an individual, your functioning as a parent. And if you're not functioning in a healthy manner, that needs to be definitely addressed, and there are things we can do. So let's look at some of the things that potentially can happen when a father loses their spouse and they have children dependent on them. It could be an issue of not really navigating the emotions properly, not knowing how. Sometimes there needs to be that guidance. Turning to substances, turning to sort of just being that stereotypical, not so much stereotypical, but not buying into what society is saying that you might become, whether it's the deadbeat father argument or the absentee father. Not really buying into that, but let's look at what you're really experiencing in terms of your functioning, and let's kind of help you to navigate each step, right? So it has to start with you, not so much the parenting first, because you want to be able to, really look at how you're functioning, really feel like this is what I need to do to arrive at healing so I can be that present father for my children. So it might be, diagnosing is something that we have to do at times for, sometimes billing purposes, but I don't always want to be diagnostic heavy, but certainly to arrive at a diagnosis of either depression, anxiety, PTSD, we have to do that deep work on how is this person functioning, and then we'll look at the criteria, we'll look at the frequency of symptoms, the duration of symptoms, and we help to educate them on what they're experiencing so that when we look at the coping skills, we look at the healing strategies, they've bought into it because now they're understanding a little better what they're dealing with.
That is essential. There has to be a framework in order to be able to go step by step by step and help her through the process. This young lady sent me an incredible research paper that actually talked about how African American men view or are viewed when it comes to the single fatherhood experience. The writer, Psyche Young, wrote this research paper, the lived experiences of minority widowers with dependent children. As I read through it, it reminded me of so much of my own personal situation. And then it also reminded me of a lot of men that I work with. What you talked about earlier was the fact that you have to have the personal healing first. Because without the personal healing, what ends up happening is you become detached from your family, from your friends. You make the choice to avoid circumstance, and children follow their parents. So if you're avoiding an issue, that's what they're going to do. When they see that approach is appropriate in your mind, they can continue to follow through. I know that there was a time where I didn't really want to talk about my wife. My daughters, they were essential in making sure that I kept their mother's memory alive. Even though I wanted to resist, not resist to say like I forgot her, just because the pain was so intense. And I was going through some things at the time. Like you talked about substance abuse and stuff like that. I was heavy into that right after my wife passed. For me, it was a way. So I thought it was a way to get away from the experiences that I was dealing with. And of course, for a minute, it was helpful until It wasn't. When you make that choice to not detach from your personal circumstances, you also make the choice to not detach from the family.
Right. Yeah.
How do you go about explaining to men that you may have the confrontations and the fears and everything, but a big part of bravery is not being scared. It's being scared but doing it anyway.
Right, right. And there's strength in being vulnerable. I know that sounds like two different things, but really there is a strength in saying, I can be vulnerable in this moment if my vulnerability means that I'm growing from this experience and growing through this experience. So when they're sitting across from me, or they're in the space, I'm holding that emotional safety space for them. I want to encourage them to access those parts of them that they have been suppressing and pushing down and avoiding, right? Because the processing, a lot of the healing will come through that. Sometimes it's the verbal processing. Sometimes it's we have to look at certain structured techniques. Sometimes it is them naming and being brave enough and courageous enough and vulnerable enough to say, this is what I'm experiencing. And it doesn't make me feel good as a person. But if I say it, and I don't give it as much power, and I say it and I feel like I'm more powerful by saying it and addressing it and confronting it, that's now my foray into healing. So the verbal expression, the accessing of emotions, the being vulnerable, being able to model that too for their children. So sometimes, children are really looking at how parents are, how what is modeled, what's the example, right? So even things like responding to stressful events, how you grieve, there's a healthy way to grieve, right? Children are looking, all of these behaviors are modeled for them. So that can be an incentive too. Like, let your children see you going to get therapeutic support, let them see you doing the work, right? I'm a big advocate for grieving as a family. It's okay to cry in front of your children. That's not a sign of weakness at all. So a lot of what you're saying I can identify with, and when they are in front of me and we're doing the work, I really help them to dispel some of the ideologies of, well, what does doing this work mean to my concept as a man, right? And that coming to therapy is a sign of strength. It's not a sign of weakness at all. It's not a strike against your manhood. As a matter of fact, it's quite the opposite. Very admirable.
Absolutely agreed. The difficulty is having a single father detached from the societal expectation, especially in our culture. We don't gravitate to mental health. A lot of the times we gravitate to things like religion, which is there's nothing wrong with that.
Hmm.
But when you just simply hear, do what you do, Jesus will work it out. Jesus, his whole thing was you have to commit to action
Yes.
in every situation. There has to be what you just talked about earlier, some type of action plan that will allow a person to take those tiny steps. Because even tiny steps amount to movement.
Right.
When you do make the decision to move forward, you have now given yourself a little bit of resilience. All those voices in your head that are telling you you can't do it, you've just negated those when you did it.
Hmm.
What are some of the things you talk to your clients about when it comes to that voice in their head? Or how do you have conversation with them to
Hmm.
help them understand that they're battling successfully
Hmm.
against the challenge? And that's why the voices are so loud.
Right, right, right. I really start with getting them to lead with their strengths, right? So I often like to highlight the fact that they are here in therapy with me. That action step of getting ready, booking your appointment, getting ready, coming, following through, and showing up. That is such a strength. That is such an admirable thing to begin with. So I highlight that for them. I said, well, you're here, and you give yourself a pat on the back for being here. You're starting the work. So I try to get them to highlight some of the strengths, even in that feeling of, I'm distressed because I'm grieving and I'm depressed and I'm anxious. There's still some strengths that can be found, but it's getting them to see it. I can't, project that onto them, right? I try to really, really facilitate the space to highlight some of what empowers them, highlight ways that they can even feel more empowered. You showed up, you're doing the work, you're here. That's the first step. The other step is, well, there's something that's keeping you functioning day by day. You're waking up. I know you might be feeling like you're on autopilot going through the motions. And part of this process in therapy will be not being so much on autopilot, but really letting yourself feel everything and still being able to take those steps forward. Sometimes I feel for, Black and Indigenous people of color that they're not wanting to access certain feelings because they believe in that. They feel like that will put them in a more vulnerable space, and vulnerability does not equate to strength in their mind. And I like to dispel that. I like to dispel that notion. So, really, just having them come and process and have a safe space. Like, you can be absolutely yourself here. You tell me what your lived experience is. And in my cultural competence, I have to understand how society is. So, understanding what you're saying in tandem with what's going on in society, that cultural competence backdrop for me is key to being able to empathize and have that compassion for what the lived experience is that they're describing.
That's vital because the safe space environment allows a person to be able to open up,
Yes.
feel free, and be vulnerable.
Yeah.
We're not seen as, especially in a black man, crying or showing your emotions is not something the outside expects. You're
Mm,
supposed to stay hard, stoic, no matter what goes on.
right.
What's interesting is inside the mind, you're going through chaos.
Right.
How do you talk to them about letting them know that it's all right? You're
Mhm,
here. You're
mhm.
in this safe space. You can be vulnerable. You
Yes.
can let your feelings out.
Yeah. Well, part of me having that discussion and, applauding them and commending them for being here, I want them to also think of, well, what are the benefits to you of doing this? How are you going to be benefited? Is your family going to be benefited, your children? So when you think of healing a Black man, think of the ripple effect of that, right? A Black man who is healed will then go and be that healing, stalwart for the family, and then the society, the community at large. So it's a ripple effect, to have him be in a more healed space. If he can buy into that thinking, if I am healed, I can then heal my family. I can help heal my community, help heal society. That is a powerful, powerful way to think of the healing process. So we talk about, yes, what you're experiencing. We talk about symptoms. We talk about strengths. We talk about potential coping mechanisms, but also allowing yourself to be supported by your community. Do you identify who can support you through this? Yes, you are, a man who's supposed to provide. Yes, you are supposed to be strong. We acknowledge all of that, but in that thinking, you can allow yourself to be supported by others. And that's a hard kind of nut to crack sometimes, having them access community supports and going to support groups and being a part of, some peer support panel discussions. And we talked about pain being transformative before. That's kind of what I mean. Like, you can turn this painful experience into something so empowering, where you're now having others glean from your experience. And so, yeah, that's actually a really powerful aspect of healing, because every time you tell your story, you're allowing yourself to verbalize some difficult emotions and feelings without necessarily re-experiencing that trauma, right? You can tell it and tell how you got through it. And how you're a little more healed is that you can tell this story without having a re-experiencing of what happened. Yeah.
The empowering aspect is when, like you said, when you take I'm gonna say a volunteer approach or
Okay.
whatever, what have you. When you speak to another young man that's going through, and you say, "Hey, this is some of the things I did. This is some of the things I went through. Here's what you're going to experience right now." You're giving them an overview of what you've gone through.
Right.
You've become an expert through experience. That actually lowers your levels of
Hmm.
stress and anxiety because now you feel confident in yourself. How do you help them navigate through the real world aspects? For instance, in a lot of African American households, you have a two income family. When one person dies, you're now reduced to one income, which was barely making it. Two incomes were barely making it, but one income is definitely not making it at all.
Right.
How do you help them to understand? You have to find a way to be able to navigate through this. You can't use the same tools to build a new house. If you've been working at a particular job for 20 years, there's nothing wrong with staying with that company, but realize that you're going to have to find a way to increase your rate of pay. So it
Hmm.
may mean you might have to get additional skills, go back to school, or you might have to look at another avenue, or you may have to incorporate what you do now with something else you want to do, like maybe you want to have an entrepreneurial experience as well.
Hmm.
Find a way to do that. How do you help encourage men to understand that nobody's going to offer you the assistance, but you can create action steps to do the work and get the results? How do you help encourage them to do so?
Right. So we've been looking at and talking about some socioeconomic factors that also impact, the individual that's going through this. So when you look at those factors in light of now you have a one income, home, you want to look at, well, what is the quality of life that you desire right now for you and your children and your family? How has that shifted and what might you need to do in terms of exercising and demonstrating the resilience to have that quality of life. And the quality of life first starts with being mentally healthy and sound. And then socially, if you're mentally healthy and sound, you're functioning better in society. So I might have them look at, well, what is your lifestyle like now that you don't have the second income, now that you don't have that person partnering with you in the parenting? And what is the desired quality of life now? And if you have a certain, some people have different ways that they would like to live, and, then what do you have to do as an individual to survive? And one thing we know how to do as a race of people is survive. And part of what we try to challenge in therapy too is that constant feeling of being in survival mode. You're always kind of like you have this angst of like hypervigilance, survival, that's not always comfortable. And so, but we know how to do it, right?
Right.
So we want to look at, well, how can you navigate your circumstances and not be defeated by them, but how can you navigate them in a way that says, okay, let's pivot, let's adjust, let's transition based on the socioeconomic factors, the what your lived experience says from you experiencing a loss and being a single parent. Let's look at the quality of life that you'd like to have and what you might have to do to get there. So it might mean that you master some time management issues and perhaps get a second job. It might mean that. It might mean, adjusting how much you are able to socialize right now because your family has certain needs that warrant more attention. It might be, I don't know, continuing education and finding the resources in the community to help you build up those skills so that your income can be higher. It could mean a whole host of things.
When it comes down to addressing the fiscal responsibility and the socioeconomic issues, it takes that that man understanding. You may have to, not may. you will have to transform in some way, shape, or form.
Absolutely.
You cannot, again, I'm going to use the same analogy, just you can't use old tools to build a new house.
Hmm.
What that means is that if you have been doing this certain thing for so long, there's nothing wrong with that. Keep doing it.
Hmm.
But then you just said something that was important. You may have to readjust other aspects of your life so that you can achieve your goals. That may mean looking at something differently. Personally, I never encourage, this is just me, I never encourage a person to look for a second job. I do encourage them to look at keeping their first job, obviously, and looking at some outside sources that can help them grow their entrepreneurial skills.
Hmm.
Because over time, it may be a situation where you might be so good at what you do that you might want to leave that other income so that you can have the financial freedom that you seek and the time freedom that you seek. For single fathers, and no matter what race, time is as essential as finance. Time allows you to build relationship with the people that matter most, which are those children. It it means that you have to also look at how are you spending your time presently. When you do a tracking back and you look at, well, when my wife was alive, I used to be able to do this, this, and that. How
Hmm.
much time did you spend not in forward progress for yourself, but in satisfaction mode, comfort mode? And understand that comfort mode is not going to be beneficial for growth and progress. And now you have to make that change. How do you have that conversation with them? Because that, when you talk about a tough nut to crack, that's a tough nut to crack because you're telling them that you got to put down your wants and you got to pick up your needs.
Right.
How do you have that conversation with them?
Right. Again, going back to the quality of life that you feel like you want, right? For yourself, for your family. And if it's if your circumstances are not going to kind of aid and improve the quality of your life, we have to have change. We have to look at what needs to be done. So it depends on that person's idea of here's what I want for me and my family, and here's what now I'm prepared to do to arrive at that. And it depends on the stages of the children too, so the stages of development that they're in. Some fathers who have lost their spouse, they might be dealing with maybe newborn. That maternal mortality rate is higher among women of color, and sometimes we don't talk enough about the fathers who are left with newborns after their spouse has died in pregnancy. Then you might have a father who has teenagers. That's a very tricky and interesting stage of development, and it requires some specific parental skills to navigate that stage of life. So, what's the quality of life for you and your family? What's happening right now, and what would you want to improve? And here's what we have to look at based on what you're saying.
What you just said is important because you're right. First off, depending on the stage of where that child is when the mother passes, it's essential. I said to myself, I am blessed that I don't have newborns.
Mm,
But then my daughters were 13 and 17
okay.
when my wife passed, which is a very essential age for girls to need their mother. And I had two daughters.
Right.
I had to learn how to become Mr. Mom. I, which again, and that's another thing with a lot of, especially African American males. We don't want to feel like we have to lose our manhood to take care of our children. And I think that sometimes ends up being a reason why some men make the choice to either avoid that or push that off to another party, grandparent, or their parents, or whatever, what have you. What do you say to them about realizing that when you pick up this mantle, you are developing some type of growth within you, something that was unearthed based off of your challenging experience that you've gone through, something you probably would have never even broached if
Mm,
this didn't happen. But
right.
now that it did, it's giving you an opportunity. I often say it's you're gifted through the curse of the challenge. How do you help them to see that this is an opportunity, not the loss, but what you can learn from the loss?
Right. The transformation that can happen, the empowerment that can happen coming from the loss, right? So you mentioned manhood, and I often like to challenge and explore. Well, let's look at manhood, right? Let's look at what society says manhood should be, or what you were raised to think manhood is, because then you're looking at gender roles, and you might be thinking, like, as a man, I might not be as emotionally available. I'm not the one to nurture and comfort and give hugs and have pillow talks. But I want to challenge that, because you can maintain your manhood and be all of those things. You can be all of those things to your children, available emotionally, very present, have heart to heart talks, show affection. Really, even it doesn't matter if your children are male, female, or whatever your beliefs are on gender and all of that, but that you can still, as a human being, provide that aspect of caregiving for your children, right? And now maybe your partner was more of the nurturer, but it doesn't mean that you can't become that. And it does not affect your manhood.
Let me tell you a really funny story. Me and my wife, it was amazing because both of my daughters play soccer. They're really good. My wife wanted to put them in ballet and stuff like that. And again, that's what you expect. The girls did not want that. They wanted to play soccer. Now, eventually my wife was became a soccer mom
Okay.
when she died. Soccer became a way for the kids to be able to get their aggressions out. But then it also became a way for me as a man to be able to build relationship with them. I had to learn the girls soccer game, which is different from men's soccer. But in learning it, I also had the opportunity to see aggressive stuff. I mean, like my daughters are the sweetest things you ever want to meet until they get on that soccer field.
Mm.
When they get on that field, I relate it to the movie Gladiator.
Mhm.
There was a time where Russell Crowe picked up the dirt and was just like, "It's go time." That's what things were with them.
Mhm.
The only reason why I'm bringing that up is because it allows you to keep your manhood in check, but at the same time, it allows you to morph to be able to address a different avenue for them. For me, it happened to be soccer.
Okay.
For another father, it could be anything else. I mean, let's take ballet. Say your daughter likes ballet. Understand how physically challenging that is. And as a man, understanding your daughter or your son is taking on a true physical challenge, you supporting them through that physical challenge allows you and them to create a bond. You know,
Right, right. And I wholeheartedly agree that the bond, the time spent, the quality engagement with your children, that's what's key. Not so much the activity, right? So it's not so much the, which sport is seen as, this masculine driven, sport. It's not so much that because it's the parent being present, showing up, being there, engaging, encouraging, being that cheerleader, no matter what it is, and still feeling like this is still me walking in my manhood. It does not affect it at all in any way, shape, or form to me to be this nurturer, this person who is present, who gives that high five or the dops or the hug when they've achieved something. That's absolutely expected as a parent, regardless of what your preconceived notions of the roles were, prior to your spouse, being harmed. So I commend you because you've lived this. You've lived this and now you're creating that platform to have other people discuss, the importance of, surviving through this and being triumphant and having well-adjusted, children who are now, I'm sure the girls are now adults, right? So
yeah,
yeah, I commend you for all of it. And you're using what you learned about your experience to help and encourage other men.
Dr. Young, we can have this conversation all day.
Yes, yes, there's so many directions to
There's
go
a
in
lot of
with
layers.
something like this. Yes, yes.
Thank you so much for lending some valuable time to the audience and especially talking about this particular aspect of single fathering. Because, like I said before, it's a subset of a subset. Single fathering due to widowhood, there are not a large amount. It's growing, but it's
Yes,
not a large amount right now.
right.
But also, single fathering in the African American experience, there are so many additional layers
Yes.
to it. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for helping me to have a conversation so that we can let brothers know who
Mhm.
have this experience. Guys, you can navigate through this successfully.
Yes.
It just means you have to make some real adjustments.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again for, hosting this discussion. And I want to encourage men out there to seek out community, and it might help you to understand that you're not going through this experience alone and that other men can fully identify with your experience. I want to highlight this organization called Black Men Heal. I love Black Men Heal, and they offer so many resources. Free therapy is one of the resources they offer, different linkages to other community organizations, but it's a wonderful, wonderful organization that's been growing and growing. And they did an amazing, I think it was a panel discussion about 2 years ago. I don't know if they have it every year, but I was watching it the other day, and it just really talked about that, fatherhood and trauma and how they cope with that, and how they arrive at healing. Even just the thinking of, well, what does healing really mean? It's not just to cope, but it's working to arrive at healing. And so Black Men Heal, you have National Alliance on Mental Illness is another great organization, NAMI. So there's help out there, and I want to encourage Black single fathers who are widowers. I really want to encourage you to seek out the support that you need. If you don't get that from family and friends, your peers, seek it out in the community. Support it out there.
The last thing I'm going to say before I let you go, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, my practice is called Ya Vision Counseling and Wellness, and I'm online. I have a website, and I'm on the social media platforms under Ya Vision Counseling, and that's YAHVISIONCW.com. Right, yavisioncw.com. And I provide all of these supportive services, trauma informed care. And I help to link people with these community resources as well. So if you feel like, in therapy, you need these linkages to certain groups and you want to get into that avenue to support your healing, I absolutely can be a bridge person for that. So I'm operating in Center City. I have an office there in Rittenhouse Square. I'm also online. I provide telehealth services. So feel free to connect with me.
Excellent. And her information will be in the show notes. Thank you for coming to see another episode of Navigating Single Fatherhood. Dr. Young, I absolutely appreciate you giving me a minute of your very busy schedule.
Happy to be here. Thank you for your time.
Like the episode discussed, single fatherhood is not easy. And when you become one after losing your spouse, it makes the hard feel almost impossible. This episode with Dr. Young, it gives single fathers tools to empower themselves while navigating through their single fatherhood widow's experience. Subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and share it with as many single fathers as you know. It equips them with tools to navigate their journey successfully. Tap that notification bell to stay alerted to the latest episodes. Gain access to every tool you can. The journey is long, but you have all the skills you need. On top of that, you have the support and the guidance to further empower you along your journey. Single fathers, you don't have to do this alone. Let's make things happen together.